Today we're going to visit this great read, Thank You for Smoking. And let's visit this quote on the inside page. To my knowledge, it's not been proven that cigarette smoking causes cancer. William I. Campbell, President and Chief Executive of Philip Morris, USA, The New York Times, December 7th, 1993. P.J. O'Rourke says this book is the perfect antidote to the 1990s. Buy yourself a pack of Camels, a cocktail shaker, and a 9mm assault weapon. Read this and then laugh. I couldn't help but think of this book yesterday as I listened to some of the news with Al, where they're back on the bandwagon against smoking again. Yet then I heard a contradictory scientific study last night on Magic 105 with John Tesh, and he's saying that obesity is now killing more people and causing more cancer than smoking. So, here we go. Author's note on this, because this is a work of fiction. Some people appear here under their own names, but this is fiction. And it's called Thank You for Smoking. We're going to read the whole prologue, so hang with me, because it's pretty funny and quite true. And there's a lot of facts in here that people should know, especially since they've waged a war again on smokers, when we've got way more pressing issues in this world. Nick Naylor had been called many things since becoming chief spokesman for the Academy of Tobacco Studies, but until now, no one had actually compared him to Satan. The conference speaker himself, the recipient of munificent government grants for his unyielding, holy war against the industry that supplied the coughing remnant of 55 million American smokers with their cherished guilty pleasure, was now pointing at the image projected onto the wall of the cavernous hotel ballroom. There were no horns or tail. He had a normal haircut and looked like someone you might pass in the hallway. But his skin was bright red, as if he'd just gone swimming in nuclear reactor water. And the eyes were bright, alive, and vibrantly pimpy. The caption was done in the distinctive cigarette pack typeface, hysterica bold. They called it at the office. It said, "Warning, some people will say anything to sell cigarettes." The audience, consisting of 2,500 health professionals, thought Nick, who, leafing through the list of participants, counted few actual MDs, purred at the slide. Nick knew this purr well. He caught the whiff of catnip in the air, imagined them sharpening their claws on the sides of their chairs. "I'm certain that our next panelist," the speaker hesitated, the word just too neutral to describe a man who earned his living by killing 1,200 human beings a day. 1,200 people, 2 jumbo jet plane loads a day of men, women, and children. Yes, innocent children, denied their bright futures, those happy moments of scoring the winning touchdowns of high school and college graduations, marriage, parenthood, professional fulfillment, breakthroughs in engineering, medicine, economics, who knows how many Nobel Prize winners, lambs slaughtered by Nicholas Naylor, and the tobacco industry fiends he so slickly represented. More than 400,000 a year, and approaching the 500,000 mark. Genocide, that's what it was. Enough to make you weep, if you had a heart. The thought of so many of these victims, their lives stubbed out upon the ashtray of corporate greed by this tall, trim, nicely tailored 40-year-old yuppie executioner who, of course, needs no introduction. Not much point in trying to soften up this crowd with the usual insincere humor that in Washington passed for genuine self-deprecation. Safer to try insincere earnestness, believe it or not, he began, fidgeting with his silk tie now to show that he was nervous when in fact he was not. I'm delighted to be here at the Clean Lungs 2000 Symposium. With the 20th century fast whimpering and banging its way to a conclusion, every conference in sight was calling itself blah blah 2000, so as to confer on itself a sense of millennial urgency that would not be lost on the relevant congressional appropriations committees, or TITs, as they were privately called by the special interest groups who made their livelihood by suckling at them. Nick wondered if this had been true of conferences back in the 1890s. Had there been a federally subsidized Buggy Whips 1900 symposium? Buggy Whips. Don't whip your horses. The audience did not respond to Nick's introductory outpouring of earnestness, but they weren't hissing at him. He glanced down at the nearest table, a round table of dedicated haters. The haters usually took the closest seats, scribbling furiously on their conference pads paid for by the U.S. taxpayers, which they'd found inside their pseudo-suede attaches, also paid for by amber waves of taxpayers, neatly embossed with the conference's logo, Clean Lungs 2000. They would take those home with them and give them to their kids, saving the price of a gift t-shirt. My folks went to Washington, and all I got was this dippy attaché. The haters, whipped by the previous speakers into ecstasies of neo-puritanical fervor, were by now in an advanced state of buttlock. They glowered up at him. Because, Nick continued, already exhausted by the whole dreary futility of it, it is my closely held belief that what we need is not more confrontation, but more consultation. A direct steal from the Jesse Jackson school of meaningless but rhymed oratory, but it worked. And I'm especially grateful to the Clean Lungs 2000 leadership for note of wry amusement to let them know that he knew that the Clean Lungs 2000 leadership had fought like Marines on Mount Suribachi to keep him out of the conference. Finally agreeing to make this a conference in the fullest sense of that word, it's always been my closely held belief that with an issue as complex as ours, what we need is more talking about each other, but more talking to each other. What we need is not more talking about each other, but more talking to each other. He paused a beat to let their brains process his subtle substituting of issue for the cigarette industry's right to slaughter 500,000 Americans a year. So far, so good. No one stood up and shouted, "Mass murderer." Difficult to get back on track after being compared to Hitler, Stalin, or Pol Pot. But then it happened. During the Q&A, some woman about halfway back got up, said that Nick seemed like a nice young man, prompting guffaws. Said she wanted to share a recent experience with him. Nick braced. For him, no shared experience with anyone in this crowd could possibly bode well. She launched into a graphic account of a dear departed's courageous battle with lung cancer. Then, more in sadness than in anger, she asked Nick, "How can you sleep at night?" No stranger to these occasions, Nick nodded sympathetically as Uncle Harry's heroic last hours were luridly recounted. "I appreciate you sharing that with us all, ma'am, and I think I speak for all of us in this room when I say that we regret your tragic loss. But I think the issue here before us today is whether we as Americans want to abide by such documents as the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. If the answer is yes, then I think our course is clear. And I think your uncle, who was, I'm sure, a very fine man, were here today, might just agree that if we go tampering with the bedrock principles that our founding fathers laid down, many of whom you'll recall were themselves tobacco farmers, just for the sake of indulging a lot of frankly unscientific speculation, then we're placing at risk not only our own freedoms, but those of our children and our children's children. It was crucial not to pause here to let the stunning non sequitur embedded itself in their neural processors. Non sequitur. Anti-tobacco hysteria is not exactly new, you remember. Of course, Murad IV, the Turkish Sultan. Of course, no one had the faintest notion who on earth Murad IV was, but people like a little intellectual flattery. Murad, remember, got it into his head that people shouldn't smoke, so he outlawed it, and he would go out at night, dressed up like a regular Turk, and wander the streets of Istanbul, pretending to have a nicotine fit and begging people to sell him some tobacco. And if someone took pity on him and gave him something to smoke, whammo! Murad would behead him on the spot and leave the body right there in the street to rot. Warning, selling tobacco to Murad IV can be dangerous to your health. Nick moved quickly to the kill. Myself, I'd like to think that we as a nation have progressed beyond the days of summary executions for the crime of pursuing our own definition of happiness. Thus, having compared the modern American anti-smoking movement to the depredations of bloodthirsty 17th century Ottoman, Nick could depart, satisfied that he had temporarily beaten back the horde a few inches. Not a lot of ground, but in this war, it was practically a major victory. So here we go again. More news hysteria yesterday on smoking, which Michael Crichton admitted before his apparent tragic death out of nowhere. Michael Crichton, if you're familiar, has a video on YouTube where he spoke out against secondhand smoke, that there was no proof against it scientifically. Michael Crichton was an author of probably one of the most important movies of the 90s, which would be Jurassic Park. He was a scientist, and somehow he just tragically died all of a sudden. Anyway, he spoke out and said there was no evidence that secondhand smoke caused cancer. Perhaps word spells cause cancer. There's actually a Dr. Emoto video with saying that putting just the warning label on your cigarettes is a spell. And now we have the news banging the drums again against cigarette smoking, when we certainly have more problems from our actual physicians pimping out medication with all their side effects than smoking. And apparently, obesity is now one of the biggest causes of cancer, not smoking. Of course, they might say that's because of their anti-smoking campaign from the 2000s. Who knows? Science. Problem with science is now it's not really tested and tried. We've got a lot of fake scientists out here. So smoke them while you got them, if that's what your definition of happiness is, because our founding fathers certainly gave us those freedoms. And I'm going to record that one part and have it separately in a reel for Facebook for this, just to try to make people aware that, you know, there's a reason it's called programming on television. I don't trust any of these people personally. I'll live my life the way I want to live my life. Actually, my relatives lived well into their 70s and 80s smoking for many years. Have a great day. Peace be with you. Go get your copy somewhere, or Thank You for Smoking. It's a funny fictional book that I think Washington needed to have written against him. It says here, by George F. Will on the back, What we need and Washington deserves is a satiric novelist as mordant, as Evelyn Waugh, and as witty as Peter DeVries. And here he is. Christopher Buckley's father, as William Buckley will come to be known if Christopher continues to write wickedly funny novels. Never in his fierce denunciations did as much damage to Washington's vanities as Christopher has done by doing justice to the place in Thank You for Smoking. You need a good laugh about DC? Read this book by Christopher Buckley. And I want to add, a doctor many years ago, before this Clean Lungs campaign came out, right before they started spraying our skies as well. Funny how that works. Basically, he told a relative of mine that smoking actually kills germs. And from what I've also understood, that although it's lining your lungs with nicotine, well, right before this anti-smoking campaign, they started spraying the skies. True facts. So, as they said in Nam, smoke them while you got them, because certainly the prices are rising. Even the cheap Montegos now have risen in price, and soon there won't be any more Marlboro Man. You might be able to vape some cotton candy, I guess. But as for me, I'm going to get some real cotton candy at the fair tonight. Well, golly, I thought these things were outlawed in the 1890s. Apparently not. We better go to our buckets this morning. Babies, now we don't have anybody trying to get in the shed and eat the food. Marguerite, all is well this morning, right? No stepping up on the steps trying to get in the shed either. Yep. The buggy whip, still working since the 1890s. I'm wondering if they've done any taxpayer-funded studies on what white sage could do to you. Maybe I'll have to go investigate that.